Hi everyone, it's Renee from Bad Outfit Great Lipstick, and I really hope you're doing well. Today I'm going to talk about negative reviews of books I love. Not to shit all over these people in most cases, because I'm a huge fan of being able to criticize things you love. I'm a big fan of Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, and I have a really hard time with those fandoms because they're very sensitive to any criticism, and I love criticizing things. But more to get that critical thinking going, and also to remind myself that I have other hobbies that don't cost me a lot of money. So fair warning, this video will obviously contain a lot of spoilers. Unfortunately, I'm also going to have to talk about sexual assault for every book because that's a factor in these reviews and my experiences with them. The first book I want to talk about, I'm going to have to compare, it's a book I love, and I'm going to have to compare it to a book I hate. So the book I love is Tipping the Velvet by Sarah Waters, and I am actually rereading this book. I'm doing a challenge where I reread a book that I remember loving or giving 5 stars at least once a month. So this is my book for January. I'm about 82 pages in it, and I absolutely remember why I love it. More on that in a moment. And the book I hate is Street Lavender by Chris Hunt. This was written at a time when overtly gay literature was not exceptionally popular or common or acceptable, so it had to be published through a smaller press. Therefore, I couldn't get it through a library. I had to go to eBay. And I hate that I own this book and I paid money for it, and now I don't know what to do with it because I don't want to donate it and somebody picks it up and reads this trash. Let me explain here. So, when I was looking at reviews of Tipping the Velvet 4 or 5 months ago, I think, somebody mentioned, oh, this book is okay, but it's a ripoff of Street Lavender. And I was like, what the hell? I love this book. Please tell me it's not a ripoff. And so I went and read the reviews for Street Lavender, and they were all just glowing reviews. And they all said, oh man, like Sarah Waters has some explaining to do because this and this are the same. It's just this has a lesbian character and this has a gay man for a main character. So I was like, holy shit, I have to read it. I have to make sure. My friends, I have never heard a bigger load of bullshit in my life. Let me tell you the similarities in these books. So the first 2 similarities are so generic. I don't know if people making the comparison based on these 2 similarities maybe just aren't that into the genre or what, but they're total bullshit. So these are both Bildungsromans, they're coming of age stories about gay characters. Again, Street Lavender is a gay man and Tipping the Velvet is a lesbian. And they're both set in the Victorian era. Neither of those is spectacular. Neo-Victorian literature is huge. I took a whole class on it in graduate school, which, apologies to anyone who had to deal with me in grad school, actually scratch that. Apologies to anybody who had to deal with me before I turned 30. I was a pretty awful person and I apologize. But it's so popular that I took a whole class on it and barely scratched the surface. I read tons of Neo-Victorian literature. I'm really into it. You can go to your library, put the word Victorian into the search box for the card catalog, and you will get an insane number of hits. It is a huge genre, and so is the gay coming-of-age story, especially in the past, I would say 2 decades. Granted, this was published earlier, but it's become a more acceptable and popular genre as being LGBTQ has become more accepted. So I don't count those 2. That's not a huge deal. The third similarity, and I will give it half a point, but again, it's more common than I think some people realize, is both of these characters are prostitutes at some point in these books. And people said, oh, well, they both become prostitutes to pay their way. And again, that's not quite as common, but historical fiction that takes a more sympathetic look at sex work is pretty common these days. Has our values, has a culture change, has what we deem acceptable changes, has we become more empathetic in ways. We reevaluate things with a modern lens. And the book that comes to my mind that also focuses on a sex worker in the Victorian era is The Crimson Petal and the White, which I had to read in grad school, again, for Neo-Victorian, and I probably would have enjoyed it more had I not had to read the whole, 600-page motherfucking book in a week while reading 500 pages of other shit for other classes. Anyway, still, you get my point. So I'll give it half a point of similarity, but again, that's not uncommon in modern historical fiction. The two similarities that I will say, okay, fine, they're kind of similar, are both of these characters are taken in, when they're prostitutes, they are taken in by a wealthy patron and they're basically kept, right? They're that person's personal prostitute. I don't feel like it's as well developed in Street Lavender. It doesn't seem to have much of a point in this book, except that he gets used to living a really nice, cushy life, and then when he's on the street, he's like, oh shit, I'm on the street. But it's not as well developed, and we don't really see much of what happens to Willie, the main character in this book, psychologically because of that relationship, as compared to Tipping the Velvet, where Nancy, our main character, is kept by a wealthy lesbian woman, and there's a lot of, it really affects her character, and she deals with a lot psychologically, and both characters end up with someone they met earlier in life who had a major impact on them. And yeah, that's similar, but it's also a really common trope in fiction. I think the biggest issues I have with the comparison between these two, besides the fact that the similarities are, to me, not that glaring, this is definitely not a copy. So much more happens in this book that doesn't happen in here, is the quality. Sarah Waters studied the Victorian era. I'm not going to get majorly into it, but she studied the Victorian era, and she's written a lot. She has an amazing writing style. This was one of her earlier books, and if you read her later books, I definitely think her style has improved. But this is written so well. So there's this passage where, and I'm going to read it because it happens in the first 20 pages of the book, so I don't feel like I'm spoiling anything too major here. But Nancy has sort of her first lesbian crush. Her goes to a show, and there's a woman named Kitty, and Kitty performs as a masher. So she dresses up as a man and sings songs, and Nancy is just instantly infatuated with her. And she's describing to her sister how watching Kitty and looking at Kitty makes her feel. So she says, when I see her, I said, it's like, I don't know what it's like. It's like I never saw anything at all before. It's like I am filling up like a wine glass when it's filled with wine. I watch the acts before her and they are like nothing. They're like dust. Then she walks on the stage and she is so pretty and her suit is so nice and her voice is so sweet. She makes me want to smile and weep at once. She makes me sore here. I placed a hand upon my chest, upon the breastbone. I never saw a girl like her before. I never knew that there were girls like her. My voice became a trembling whisper then, and I found that I could say no more. Is that not like the best description of infatuation you have ever read? You're not going to get writing like that in here. In fact, at times I found this writing style so boring and such a slog to get through that the only reason I finished this was to see how it compared to Tipping the Velvet. The biggest problem I have with people being like, I love Street Lavender and it's so good and Tipping the Velvet totally ripped it off and this book is better. I can't sympathize with this character in large part because he attempts to rape his cousin and the book kind of hand waves it away. They're like, yeah, okay, it was a bad thing, but it's not like it's that bad. I will read it for you so you can see what I'm talking about. So here's how that chapter starts. Let me get there. As to what happened later that night, all I can say in my defense is that I was in a very disturbed state. I know it's not much of an excuse, because what I did to Georgie was unforgivable. Right. I feel ashamed, but at the same time I feel truculent and sullen. Really? Fuck you. That night I sort of erupted and became myself. I stopped being this false pretending person who spent the day politely fitting into a sphere which wasn't his, and the night giving way to crude, abandoned lust affairs. Instead, I merged. And then he says, to this day, I'll never know if I did it out of dreadful frustration and need for Georgie. Fucking what? Or out of vicious spite and jealousy, because he had so much and I had so little, and I felt we deserved the same. That's it? That's your excuse? I don't care if you're gay, straight, whatever. Attempting to rape someone is non negotiable. And he gets caught and sent to a reformatory, and they're like, you need to, write stuff out of the Bible to repent for your sins. And of course, they're talking about his homosexuality. I get that. But he responds to this with, like, yeah, what I did was bad, but it's not like I killed somebody. My dude, you tried to rape somebody. I just can't. Like, I don't know what to do with this book. Do I burn it? Do I sell it for 50 cents? Like, what do I do with it? Now that I've complained about Street Lavender for 10 minutes, let's move on to the other two books. And I don't physically have them because I love libraries and I'm a cheap bitch. So I go to the library and get 99% of what I read from the library. So the first one is Searcy by Madeline Miller. And I seriously had no idea this book was going to become such a phenomenon. What happened was when it first came out, I was walking through my library's new books section and I saw Searcy on a book spine. And I used to be really into Greek mythology when I was young. Not so much now, but I was really into it when I was young. And I still have this attachment to Greek mythology. And one of my favorite things to read is books that look at folklore or mythology or fairy tales from another angle. So, like, I love books that, the evil stepmother in a fairy tale, it tells the story from her point of view. Snow Glass Apples by Neil Gaiman. Holy shit. Anyway, so I saw this book. I read the little summary on the inside and went, yeah, this sounds like something I would like. Took it home, read it, finished that thing in, I don't even think 3 days. I loved it. I could not put it down. Oh my God. So Searcy, for those of you who don't know, is, if you've ever read the Odyssey, and if you went to high school in the United States, you probably did, when Odysseus and his men end up on this island, Searcy is a goddess slash witch who lives on this island, and in the Odyssey she turns Odysseus's men into pigs, and then eventually Odysseus kind of has a relationship with her, which even when I was 16 in reading the Odyssey for my English class, I was like, this really dicks me off that he sleeps with every good-looking woman he runs across, and meanwhile his wife Penelope is supposed to be chaste, and he throws a fucking fit when he comes back to his home after he's been gone for what, a decade? And he's like, why are all these dudes here hanging around my wife? And I'm like, you have been having sex with every woman who would have you. What are you talking about? Anyway, that's a tangent. That's who Searcy is. And this book follows her from her birth and her childhood throughout her life. I love this book. Now, the negative reviews of this book focus a lot on sexual assault and rape. The first thing they point out is this scene where Searcy has been taking care of sailors who wash up on her island. So they wash up, they're starving, they're hungry, they're sick. She takes care of them, she feeds them, she helps them get back on their feet, and then they leave. There is a scene where a ship washes up on her island, she feeds them, and they start asking her, like, where's your husband? And she's like, oh, I don't have a husband. And they're like, oh, you don't, so there's no men here. And then I want to say it's the captain rapes her. And before the others can attack her, she turns them all into pigs. And that is supposed to be the reason why she turns these sailors into pigs. It's not just some random act of cruelty. She has some kind of motivation for it. I have a lot of problems with how rape and sexual assault and sexual abuse are often depicted in media, in books, movies, television. I think it's often used as like a shocking thing. Like, we're going to make it as graphic and disgusting as possible, and ooh, it's so edgy. Or they use it as the only way to develop a female character. They'll be like, oh man, this woman is going through a lot. Why? Because she was raped, and they don't deal with it in a very sensitive way, and there's nothing else to that character. It's just, ooh, gee, she was assaulted. And I'm like, that's not my jam, and I have a lot of problems with it. I don't see that happening in Searcy. Yes, this happens to her, but it is not the only thing that happens to her. It is not the only thing that affects her character by far. We do see her dealing with the trauma. The scene also isn't exceptionally graphic. You know what's happening. It lasts for about a page, but it's not drawn out or made very explicit. It's not done for shock factor. So that I am okay with, because to me, when it is written about in a way that is empathetic and sensitive, it can help us as a society, as people, be more empathetic to people who are going through this. That said, are there other ways Madeline Miller could have done this? Are there other ways that, or other motivations she could have created for Searcy? Sure, of course. The other reviews that I don't really agree with are the ones that say, this book makes it seem like every man is a rapist, which I call bullshit. There's plenty of guys in the book who are not rapists. There's plenty of guys in the book who are absolute shitheads, and in fact, most characters in this book are really unpleasant. They're not nice people, but they never rape anybody. I could be lying, but in the book, I don't recall Helios, the god of the sun, and Circe's father raping anybody. But I think the reason I really get frustrated with this is I'm like, have you ever read Greek mythology? It's very, very rapey. If you read Greek mythology, what really gets to me is they often write about it in the most, oh, it's not that bad kind of way. And the one that always gets me is it's about Achilles. And so his mother is Thetis, and she's like a water nymph or a water goddess. And the gods tell this mortal man, you know, when she comes out of the water, grab her, hold on to her, and make her your wife. That means rape her. Like, when she comes out of the water, grab her and rape her, and then we will basically force her to be married to you for X number of years. That's the way they write about it. When you have Achilles and Agamemnon and all these people taking Trojan women as their war prizes, that's them taking sex slaves. That's what that is. How many things did Zeus turn into so he could have sex with some unsuspecting mortal woman? Like, oh gee, I don't want my wife to know, and I don't want this mortal lady to tell me no, so I'm gonna turn into fucking rain and then rape her. Like, that is Greek mythology. And I was kind of glad that Madeline Miller was like, yep, this is Greek mythology, this is how it's written about, and it's pretty disgusting. Like, I was glad that she didn't just gloss over that shit. The last book I want to talk about is Kindred by Octavia Butler. It is about a black woman named Dana living in the modern era who at random times, out of nowhere, will get sent back in time to a slave plantation to save a little white boy named Rufus. And eventually she realizes, spoiler here, eventually she realizes that she is getting sent back in time every time Rufus is in danger of dying. So every time his life is threatened, she gets sent back in time. The reviews that are sort of sticking out to me are the ones that complain that Dana is too nice to Rufus. They complain that she calls him Rufy, like that's his nickname, and she's really nice to him even though he's a slave owner and a rapist and not a very nice person. And I'm not sure I really understand those reviews. Dana is a black woman being sent back in time to a slave plantation. She cannot be a dick to white people. Like, she's pretty well aware by the end of the book that this is a garbage can of a human being. But she's a black woman on a slave plantation. And I'm not going to reveal how she goes back to the modern time, to her present time, you know what I mean? How she comes back to the present, because I don't want to spoil too much. But it's not something easy. Like, she can't just go back whenever she wants. So she has to be at least amenable to this person, or else she's going to be in a world of hurt. In my opinion, Dana does struggle with this. There are parts in the book where she references how we in the present time write about slavery and represent slavery, and especially what happened to black women during that time, and how it's often glossed over, and she seems to struggle with that. Now, I could just be biased because at the time that I was reading Kindred, I was also rereading Ain't I a Woman by Bell Hooks. And that book deals a lot with how we have ignored or glossed over what happened to black women during slavery and the civil rights movement, and how it has affected black women throughout history. And that may have affected my reading of this book, but I think that Dana does struggle with that. She has some difficulties with the reality of it. And I think that's important, if only because We're getting better about it these days, but we still don't really want to talk about it. And we still don't want to talk about it in terms that are honest and realistic. Just look at how many movies and books have come out about Sally Hemings and Thomas Jefferson, and they don't describe the relationship realistically. So those were some negative reviews of books that I love. Do you agree or disagree with me? What books do you love? What terrible things have people said about them? Have you read Street Lavender? Do you agree that this is not actually what Tipping the Velvet is ripped off of? Am I crazy? I don't know. Just leave me your thoughts on books down below, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.